to the task in hand, the horrible B word. Now, for the last 2 years of the last 3 years, people were just bored rigid with Brexit. If it came on the telly, they would, when it comes on the telly, I just turn it off. And then we wonder why people don't know what it's going to mean. And the problem is, both running up to the referendum itself and since, people think that Europe's all about trade and business. And they think Brexit's all about trade and business. It'll not affect me. Even people who own a business go, well, it's not an import-export business. I'm a hairdresser, it won't affect me. If we're outside the European Chemicals Agency, it affects the things that are in your hairspray and your supplies for your hairdressing. It affects everybody. And the one that, to me, of course, as a doctor, is most important, is the impact on health. Because that affects every single one of us. And it has taken me literally the last 3 years to get a lot of these issues even on the agenda at all at Westminster. Now, part of that is because I don't think they've thought about some of them. They don't care about a lot of them. There's a ghost in there. But it's important that people understand what it means. And it's important we get as many people to understand before they're voting on Thursday what it means. Because it will impact on the vote that they might make and the signal that they want to send out. That Scotland doesn't want Brexit. We never wanted it, we voted against it. Now I'm going to run through, and you've got these leaflets on your table, so take them away. It'll be a prompt for you if you're discussing this with somebody else, or even kind of give one to somebody that you think it might be helpful for. And kicking off is thinking about, when I used these topics before the referendum, my articles were positive, my speeches were positive. Please be aware of all the great stuff we're getting from Europe, don't throw it away. Now I know we were told to be positive, but I'm struggling. Because at the moment, we're in the position where these things are going to be thrown away. And it is important that we recognise what we might lose. Now, number one is workforce. Workforce is the biggest single challenge for all 4 UK health services. England's got 41,000 nursing vacancies and 100,000 vacancies overall. We are struggling to fill all our nursing posts and medical posts. And yet their nursing vacancy rate is more than twice ours. So anyone here who's a nurse or works in the NHS, you know how pressured you are. Imagine how your colleagues in England are feeling. And European nationals make up 5% or more of our workforce, including my German husband, who's been a GP in NHS Scotland for over 30 years. And 3 years on, we're only beginning to start to see what Brexit's going to mean for Europeans. And the problem is we've already lost some of them. People who were here who just couldn't take the insecurity anymore. Certainly people in England. I mean, I've been at events in Westminster where people have talked about, European citizens have talked about their kids being bullied, about being spat at in the street if they use their own language. Now, I would hope there's not been that kind of behaviour in Scotland. But people feel insecure and they're worried. And they look at Windrush and how people from the Caribbean were treated. The government of the day actually went and said, please come, we need people. And look at how they've been treated. So there's a lot of anxiety. And what we have certainly seen is it's stopping people coming here. There's been a 90% drop in European nurses coming to work in the UK. 90% drop. That means, in essence, that's dried up altogether. And the thing is, while in the referendum they said, oh, you know, it's Europeans that are stopping you seeing a doctor, this is why the NHS can't cope. I can tell you, without our European colleagues, the NHS won't cope. There's a bigger chance that you were queuing to see a European than that there were Europeans blocking you in the queue. And it is important to remember, healthcare isn't delivered by buildings or machines. It's delivered by people. It doesn't matter what buildings or machines they use, there will always be a person at the centre of that that is looking after you. And the further north and west you go into the Highlands and onto the islands, the proportion of Europeans gets higher, particularly from Central Europe, Holland and Germany, because they don't have mountains that sweep into the sea. They don't have wild islands. They absolutely adore Scotland, and they've made Scotland their home. We want them to stay, but when they're older and they're retired, we want other Europeans to feel that they can come and live here too. And while Theresa May celebrates the end of freedom of movement, to me, freedom of movement was the biggest single benefit that we got as individual citizens. Our right to move around, to settle, to study, to marry, to love, to work, anywhere. My husband's mother was Polish and his father was German, and they weren't allowed to marry when they met in the war. They had a child that was taken from them. His father was lifted by the Gestapo and his mother was a forced labourer. And long before we ended up in this mess, he used to say, I can't believe that in one generation I can marry who I love and live where I like. And in one more generation, we're taking that away from our young people. So make no mistake, freedom of movement isn't something to celebrate the end of. It's actually the biggest personal loss for every one of us. And for Scotland, immigration is existential. Our working age population is falling. We need more people. And we need to find ways of hanging on to the young people we have. If we just gradually depopulate into the Central Belt and just become literally that image we've been sold of ourselves, and we sit here with an economy that doesn't function, without enough workers and taxpayers to support our public services, with our tin cup out to Westminster, then our young people will go on hemorrhaging out of Scotland. And that's not what we want. We want a vibrant, dynamic country that they can actually live in, settle in, and succeed in. Now, the next thing after workforce is things like medicines, radioisotopes. We don't make insulin in the UK. We don't make radioisotopes for things like bone scans. We import them. Now, what woke people up to Brexit last autumn was when the government suddenly started talking about stockpiling, and stockpiling food and medicines. People went, wait a minute. Even Leavers went, wait a minute, I didn't vote for that. Nobody mentioned that. But the problem is, these things are not just a matter of if it's a no deal. There's no question that there will be more delay at borders. The one word you will not find in Theresa May's current withdrawal agreement is the word frictionless, because it won't be frictionless. Now, the common isotope that we use in bone scans, it's called technetium, comes from a precursor called molybdenum. Now, all radioactive material decays down to not really being radioactive at all. And even the precursor only loses half of its radioactivity in just 66 hours. That's less than 3 days. That means you can't stockpile it. And if it ends up spending 12 hours stuck in the river, and then having a different route to actually get to the hospitals, it's got fewer useful doses when it gets there. All of that adds to cost for the NHS. We export and import a similar amount of drugs. Ones that are made in the UK and exported to Europe, ones made in Europe and imported to here. If we start having to pay, customs charges and paperwork on all of that, which we don't have at the moment, it'll all add to the cost. And if the NHS is spending more money on things like this, that's less money for fixing hips or, providing enough staff. What we're also leaving is the European Medicines Agency. This is a single drug licensing system for the whole of the EU and the EEA. That means when a new drug is discovered, it can go through one process instead of 31 processes, so we get access to it. If you look at countries like Canada and Australia, they get access to new drugs about 6 months or a year later. Because obviously, drug companies don't want to pay out to go through a whole process to access a smaller market of the UK, when they can actually pay a similar amount and access 450 million people. And that's the reason why drugs are launched in Europe at almost the same time as America. And we've benefited from that. So from the laboratory to the patient has been shortened because of the European Medicines Agency. And they also tried to direct research towards areas of rare diseases, particularly in children, congenital abnormalities. These didn't get researched before because they're so rare. It's very hard to get enough patients together to do a trial. But out of a population of 500 million, you can do that. And the European Medicines Agency has pushed that. And that's what people will see. Oh, I can't get the medicine I'm normally on. It's going to be something different. Or I'm having to wait. And that is a real issue for people. So even if there isn't a no deal, there will need to be stockpiles to try and smooth out any delays at the border. And as I say, that will include radioisotopes, which simply can't be stockpiled. The next one is your little European health insurance card, which I hope that anybody with any sense has got. At the moment, that means if you now, in a men's event, I would say if you're off to Munich Beer Festival, if you're on a hen night in Prague, and you fall over off your kind of Jimmy Choos and you break your ankle, the great thing is they treat you as if you came from that country. You get exactly the same healthcare as a local. It allows you, even if you've got a severe chronic condition, to arrange treatment in advance. So someone with kidney failure who's on dialysis, now that means 3 times a week. At the moment, being in the EU, they could go for a week to Italy and have their dialysis on their normal days. I defy anyone in this room to show me a travel insurance affordable by mere mortals that would cover that, because I just don't think that's possible. It also allows for something very specialist for people to plan to have treatment in another European country. And particularly it has allowed our senior citizens who want to retire to the sunshine actually have healthcare and indeed social care as if they were a local. That's amazing. And did we ever hear anybody praise it in advance? No. That's how we got here. For 40 years, Europe has been a great whipping boy, a great target to blame for all the ills of everything. Politicians have been able to say, we would fix this problem, Europe won't let us. And we've never heard a celebration of the benefits that we were actually getting. Number 4 is research. Europe is actually the biggest research network in the world. It's bigger than America and bigger than China. And the UK have actually been the biggest beneficiary. We were sitting at number 1 for getting more funding out than we were putting in. And it isn't just funding. You know, Westminster says, oh, don't worry, we'll replace the funding. But I'm sorry, sitting in a muddy field with a bag of money doesn't help you with research. It's collaboration. It's whole teams that are right across Europe being able to work together on the same problem. And similarly being able to say, I can't get that experiment to work. Okay, I'll be on the Ryanair flight first thing in the morning. To simply be able to move around with no discussion and no issue. And to be able to put your efforts together. Europe has just come up with a new clinical trial system that is going to have a single way of putting forward research ideas, registering them, gathering the data, analysing them, publishing them in a shared fashion. And we're going to be outside. And what you're already seeing is people who have led on research are being asked to step aside if they're from the UK. Oh, if you're the team leader, we might not get the funding. You can join in for now, but we'd like you to no longer be team leader. And that is already driving lead researchers out of the UK and out of Scotland. Because in among this research funding, actually in Scotland, we punch way above our population weight. But we have about 1/3 of people who work in research in universities, and about 1/4 of senior staff are Europeans. So some of them are going, well, okay, things are not too bad yet, but it's clear the UK will not be at the leading edge in the future, so I'm off. And we're already hemorrhaging some of the staff. And we're already hemorrhaging people who are from the UK because they're going, well, if this isn't going to be the leading edge place, I'm taking that job in Rome or Paris or Berlin. And that is critical to us, is we have a huge university sector. We have a ridiculous number of universities per head of population. And Scotland, our young people are the most highly educated in Europe. 45% of them have a university degree or a higher national qualification. Scotland's always had a highly educated population, and that has made us attractive for businesses to open here, particularly high-tech businesses, and it has made us attractive to bring students in and to win research contracts. All of that is being undermined completely against our will. And the last big thing is public health and health and safety. It's often been pressure from Europe that has pushed the UK to clean up our beaches, clean up our water, try to tackle road pollution, and particularly things like health and safety at work. You know, what do you hear? You hear health and safety gone mad. Well, I can tell you, when I worked as a young surgeon, having people in with chemical burns, thermal burns, hand injuries, arm injuries from work was just 10 a penny. It happened all the time. So when these Conservatives who want Brexit because they think they can make a lot of money out of it, talk about red tape and oh, let us get rid of red tape, remember, one man's regulation is someone else's life and limb. And I'm sorry, who's going to keep pressure on a government like we have at the moment if we're not in Europe? Who's going to say it's important that if you're making cars, you're not poisoning the workers at the same time? If you're painting things, you're not giving people bladder cancer at the same time? That you're not dropping bits of equipment on people? I'm really concerned about that, because that's how they will make money out of Brexit, is by cutting away the rights of workers, the protections of workers. And a lot of them, including protections we as women value around maternity rights, parental rights, have come from Europe. And that means that our future as ordinary people is hugely undermined by Brexit. Nigel Farage or Rees-Mogg might make lots of money. You look at times of war, the rich always make money in times of crisis. But ordinary people don't. The top 10% in the UK are 3 times richer now since the banking crash. Where's everybody else? We're definitely not 3 times richer. And to be honest, that's a lot of what Brexit appears to be about, because Europe is trying to lay rules about tax avoidance, about moving money around, about trying to have structures within the murky financial world that stop companies or individuals playing with their money to not pay their fair share. And obviously that threatens a lot of very powerful people. Now, for me, it's not just the direct impacts of Brexit. It's the fact that Brexit's also being used to undermine our Parliament and to hollow it out. They won't shut it, they wouldn't dare shut it, but they will eviscerate it. They are already setting in train things that pull everything back to Westminster. The power grab, now lots of people don't know what it particularly means, but it's 24 areas of policy that have been devolved for 20 years, where now the ultimate control will be Westminster, not Hollywood. And they say, oh, but you didn't have that power sat at Europe. Yes, but the EU is all about creating a level playing field across Europe. It's very legalistic, it's a bit boring, it's in black and white, it's in all the languages, but it doesn't leave you any wiggle room. But it is about establishing a level playing field. And I'm sorry, that's not what the UK is about at all. What the Scottish Government demanded during the Withdrawal Act was that any new UK frameworks should be agreed. Westminster wouldn't accept that and said, no, they had the right to impose. And that's what they had. That was the night when, there was a 19-minute debate, all of it used by the minister, no Scottish MP of any party got to speak, and then they voted it through. And you have to remember that in these frameworks being set up, when the 4 countries are debating or negotiating, the UK government will be negotiating on behalf of England, because there isn't a separate English government. But at any point, because they have taken the right to impose, they can just go, enough already. We're also the UK government, and this is how it's going to be. So we see in farming, just as an example, what they're proposing is that there won't be direct subsidies to farmers. Now, for our hill farmers in rural areas, that's going to make life really difficult, particularly if they're outside the Common Agricultural Policy and there are significant tariffs on their produce. Think of the threat that would be to our rural economy. Now, they can do that because England only has 17% less favoured land. That means mountain and heather and all the kind of wild places. In Scotland, we've got 85%. Wales, 81%. Northern Ireland, 72%. So the three devolved nations are a complete mirror image in need and structure from England. But what we're going to have is an agricultural bill that suits England. And money will only be given for what's classed as public good. And unfortunately, and rather weirdly, food production will not be classed as public good. It will be doing environmental things, will be classed as public good, but not actually keeping food at a price that we can afford. And that's just an example of it. I know it doesn't relate to health, but this is what we are seeing going forward. And we're seeing it with the immigration bill, where they're talking about setting a threshold of £30,000 a year to come in. Now, the average salary in Scotland is £26,000 a year. And 3/4 of all European citizens who are here now wouldn't qualify under the new scheme. Junior doctors don't earn 30,000, nurses don't earn 30,000, teachers don't, laboratory technicians don't, young graduates don't. So that's going to make it very difficult to be attracting people into Scotland. And what we discovered when the replacement for freedom of movement was going through is that they plan a 3-year visa. And they say that will allow people to work or study, and isn't that great? Now, I was on the committee, and I said, but that's no use to Scotland. Our degrees are honours degrees, and they're 4 years. You'll need to change that. Why don't you just make it the course? Medical degrees are 5 years. Some engineering degrees are 5 years. Well, we discovered in education questions recently, no, they haven't changed it. So when one of my colleagues asked the Education Minister, what's your solution to this? Because people are not going to come and study at Scottish universities. Oh, well, when they get to 3 years, they'll have to apply for a new visa. So European students are going to be charged thousands of pounds to come here and study, on the risk that 3 years into their course, when they're in the middle of doing their dissertation for their honours, they're going to start fighting with the hostile Home Office. I don't think so. So that completely undermines the Scottish university sector. And they are utterly unwilling to reconsider it. And this is the problem. This is not being done in agreement with the devolved governments. Poor Northern Ireland doesn't even have a devolved government at the moment. It is simply being, this is what we're going to do, like it or not. And that is a real threat for us. What we're also seeing is talk about the replacements for some of the European funds. Instead of them being devolved to Holyrood, as would be the norm, that they're going to try and run them out of Westminster, because that gives them the direct power over local government. So there's a lot of these things where power is being taken back, and our Parliament is going to be weakened. Now, I know lots of people don't support independence, but the vast majority support devolution. The vast majority of people know that our health system is different from the one in England because we have our Parliament, and that it is providing us with quite a lot of benefits that don't exist in the other 3 nations. Now, there are people who don't know that, and some of our job is to try and make sure people do know it. But, you know, from the baby box to free early learning and childcare, to free prescriptions, free tuition for our students, free personal care for our elderly. We're the only nation in the UK that provides free personal care. And all of that is because we have our own Parliament that prioritises health in all policies rather than our position on the world stage. But if that is hollowed out, these things become under threat. And as was mentioned earlier, we never went down the route of turning NHS Scotland into a market the way they've done in England. We didn't set out to privatise and have Virgin Care running big tracts of community hospitals and general practice, etc. And what I've seen from the people I meet, because of course I'm the health spokesperson at Westminster, is the sheer fragmentation. Before you get into how much money is wasted in England on all the bidding and tendering and all the administration, is people can't cooperate because they're competing. That doesn't make sense in healthcare. You actually want to work together so that the patient's path is as smooth as you can make it. And we see the disadvantages of that. So part of the Health and Social Care Act, Section 75, pushed GP commissioners to put all contracts that could be put out to tender had to be put out to tender. And we see how that law is used. In Surrey, 6 commissioning groups, they didn't break a contract, but at the end of the contract they thought, you know what, let's bring this back into the NHS. This hasn't worked very well. Of course, Virgin, their modus operandi, if they don't win a new franchise on the West Coast Rail, or any other new contract, is they sue you. So they sued these commissioning groups, and because it's there in law for England that these things have to be put out to tender, they were able to take that forward. Now the commissioning groups gave up. They didn't go to court because of the cost, and we know that they have settled for at least $2 million. It's all hidden behind confidentiality, but one of the commissioning groups accidentally published that they were paying $360,000. So if you multiply that by 6, it's at least $2 million, although they were one of the smaller groups. That's £2 million not being spent on patient care. And it's all of these things that are leaching money out of NHS England. And as I say, undermining the actual structure of cooperation. In Scotland, when we got our Parliament, almost immediately we turned on our heel because we had trusts. We had the various trusts were meant to be competing with each other. Because although NHS Scotland has always been a separate entity, of course our policy was coming from Westminster until 1999. But straight away we turned on our heel, we got rid of hospital trusts, we then got rid of primary care trusts, and we're now doing a much harder job of trying to integrate health and social care. We've been able to do that because we have our own Parliament, and it is critical that we defend that Parliament going forward. And to me it's only independence that's actually going to allow the people of Scotland to defend their Parliament, to choose our own future, whether it's in the EU or the EEA or whatever else. This isn't about leaving anything. You know, we're not laying charges along the Solway Fault and sailing off into the Atlantic. Wouldn't mind if we went a wee bit closer to the net, but we're not planning that. So when people talk about don't leave, we're going to be exactly where we've always been. We'll be here. You'll be welcome to come on your holidays. It's about self-determination. It's about being in charge of your own decisions. And what Brexit has shown us, no matter what the final outcome is, even if it doesn't happen, what it's shown us is that we do not matter one tuppenny toss to Westminster. Our voices mean nothing. And I can tell you, after 4 years sitting on a green bench, they do not care. They don't care what we say, they don't care what we do, they don't care how you vote, they don't care how I vote. And that is what this is about, and it's actually the only thing it's about. But what it gives us is it starts to give us the powers we don't have now to really aspire to what we often talk about, a fairer, healthier Scotland. Poverty is the biggest single driver of ill health. I'm on a cross-party group about health in all policies, and it's about how the breadth of political decision-making affects health and well-being. And we did a report coming up to the Welfare Act of 2016, and we were working with the UK Faculty of Public Health, and there's a fact that I learned that I've never been able to get out of my head, that in the UK, every year, we lose 1,400 children under the age of 15 as a direct result of poverty. That's premature birth, that's low birth weight, that's fetal alcohol syndrome, that's house fires, that's road accidents, that's suicide, that's drug, that's alcohol. All of those things are associated with growing up in poverty and deprivation. And I'm sorry, the main levers that drive poverty are the decisions made in Westminster. And there's only 59 Scottish MPs in total. You know, when Labour decided to abstain on the second reading of the welfare bill, we can't make that go in a different direction. We won't be ever the government of the UK. Everything is driven by what is chosen in England and predominantly what suits the southeast of England. And that's what we would have with independence. And that's what we don't have now. Now, 1 in 5 Scots are living in poverty. And what's worse is 1 in 4 children in Scotland are growing up in poverty. But the surprising thing is that that's actually the best rate of the 4 nations of the UK. So we're at 24% of children in poverty. England's at 30%. Now that's a disgrace. It's an absolute disgrace. And it's getting worse. There's actually 500,000 extra children growing up in poverty since 2015. So it's getting a lot worse. Not because of the banking crash in 2008. Child poverty started to climb after the first welfare changes, and then again after the second welfare changes. And it's even worse. If your mum is a lone parent who happens to also be disabled, and you've got 3 kids in the family, the double, triple whammy that they took is enormous. You're talking about people who've lost 10-20% of their income due to these changes. And there's a terrible narrative that happens in Westminster, like it's an achievement to be rich. Even if you inherited it, which a lot of them have done, it's not an achievement to be rich. When you work back, you will still find that some part of that journey, for 99% of rich people, they had an advantage over everybody else. Won't always mean they inherited it, but there will be some point where they had an advantage that nobody else had. You know, including Mr. Trump and all the money his dad gave him, which he lost. Being rich is not a virtue. Being good and decent is a virtue. And the way they look down on people who are in poverty, as if it's a failure. You'll have seen that figure before, that 2/3 of children in poverty have a working parent. That's now 70%. So this mantra that they use of, well, if you were just willing to work, work will solve poverty. It isn't solving poverty because of 0 hours contracts, low pay, insecure work. We now have poverty employment, and people cannot get out of that. And one of the things that we could do if we were independent is we could set the real living wage as the minimum wage, not the pretending living wage that the Conservatives have set. We invest in business startup. We invest in skills development. But you see, if a company starts to flourish, where does their corporation tax end up? Treasury. If they're employing people, who is it saves on unemployment benefit? The DWP. It doesn't come back to the Scottish Government. We get 29% of tax we've got control over. People are bitching because the Scottish Government did not take on the assignation of VAT. VAT was not being devolved. It was simply that they were going to say, we think this is the amount of VAT that was paid in Scotland, and you can have that. But in 2 years, they've not been able to come up with a formula for how you would work that out. If you actually had power over VAT, you would say things like, see if you're going to do work in your house that makes you more energy efficient. Let's give you 0 VAT. Let's get VAT off tampons. Let's change what we charge VAT on. Let's change what we charge corporation tax on. If you are a really good company, training and treating your staff well, we'll give you 1 rate. See if you're an abusive employer, treating people like human robots. Well, I'm sorry, you're paying full whack. We don't have these levers, and we don't have the economic half of the circle to create a virtuous circle. If we invest in people and businesses and local economies, there has to be a return to the Scottish Government so they can do it again, or else the money's just leaching out. At the moment, they're spending £125 million just mitigating cuts that have come from Westminster. So trying to pay the bedroom tax for people. Again, we're the only nation in the UK that is doing that. They've set up the Scottish Welfare Fund for people who are in crisis. But that 125 million shouldn't be spent mitigating decisions made at Westminster. That could be in our schools, our hospitals, our community halls, our local government. But it's not. We're having to try and unpick things. My view would be surely Scotland can aspire to more than just patching up austerity that comes from Westminster. So we need to be having a choice. We need to have the possibility of self-determination. And we need to be able to choose our own path. Now, the Tories, Labour and Lib Dems, they don't want us to have a choice, and they categorically don't want us to have a voice. But we need to have that. So those of you, whether it's within Women for Indy, whether you're in a party, whether you're in a yes group, it doesn't matter. We need to be having conversations with people. And they need to be respectful. We should recognise there are people who believe in the union in the same way we believe in independence. And if you recognise that you're not going to change somebody, stop banging your head on a brick wall, because you're not going to change them. And for goodness sake, if you're on social media, don't get into some rammy with somebody. If someone puts up something that's incorrect and you have a source, fine, share it back and say, actually, I think you'll find this is correct. Here's the link to whatever. But do not get into an argument and do not get into a slanging match. You're not going to change that person. That's clear from their tweet or their Facebook post. But there will be other people who voted no in 2014 who think that's how you talk to them. Because they think that's how you talk to no voters. You, yes, yeah, you, all of these kind of negative language, it's not going to convert anybody. Whose mind did you change by banging them over the head with a stick? You want to reach out. You want to actually make it clear, whether it's Women for Independence or any other group. If you have a question, come and ask us. Don't be embarrassed to ask us. We'll try and answer it. We'll try and even give you evidence for it, so that you can think about it and make your decision. We need to be welcoming. And we also need to realise there's lots of reasons people voted no. And it's not all because they sleep in red, white and blue jammies and have, kind of royal memorial teacups and things. People were lied to. European citizens were told Scotland will be thrown out of Europe, it will never get back in, and you'll be deported. The vast majority of European citizens voted no. The vast majority now would vote yes. Older people were told, often by politicians knocking their door and saying if it's a yes on Thursday, there'll be no pension next week. And that was clearly and blatantly a lie. But let's look at that pension. It is 29% of average earnings. It is the lowest in all the OECD countries. The worst. Ask WASPy women. Is that a WASPy woman over there? How they feel about the fact they've had 6 years of their pension taken away. So all that, oh, what an amazing pension. Isn't it great? Don't risk it. Except, like my aunts that live in Canada, they still get the pension in proportion to what they paid in. So we had all of these lies that were told to people. And we also had people who just weren't sure. And that's our fault. We didn't convince them enough. And they saw the status quo as a big, smooth motorway with bright lights and nice and easy. I'm not sure, so I'm just going to vote for the status quo. Where we are now, there isn't a status quo. It's a fork in the road. And our choice is between the upheaval and chaos and isolationism of Brexit or the upheaval of independence. And there's no question. It will be a big change. But that's the choice that people will have to make. And if we choose to just stay in isolationist, anti-foreigner UK, we'll be in the boot of Theresa May's car. And by the end of the year, we could be in the boot of Boris Johnson's car. But if we choose independence, we're in the driving seat. And it's our choice where we go, what we do. As I say, there's no independence fairy. It won't drop out of the sky. Every one everyone will have to get up off their bahookies, roll up their sleeves and get to work. The difference is, just like Women for India, we'll not be sitting there going, oh, we can't, and could you please give us? We'll be going, we can. It'll be hard work, but we can make it happen. And we would have the honour to be the generation that actually started to build the better Scotland that we all want to live in. Thank you very much.